Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls, and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.
Before we jump into this podcast, I have to apologize. While recording this, we picked up some interference that neither of us could hear. We've did our best to clean it up. We hope you enjoy the podcast, and thank you all for listening to Cutting the Distance. As you all know, the sole purpose of this podcast is to help you find your target animal, get them close, and ultimately kill the animal as quickly and ethically as possible. Today we will be discussing the killing end of this equation with Daniel Compton of Federal Ammunition. Our focus in today's conversation will be on shotgun shells while chasing turkeys. With so many options out there, I hope to dive into some of the things I want to know more about, such as shot size, shot material, shell length, choke options, and everything in between and how they all interact with each other. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be on.
Yeah. How's everything going there at Federal Ammunition?
It's good. We're cranking it out as fast as we can. Very common question these days is like, where's all the ammo? And I know it's been a little tough for people, but I usually like to address it right away when I get on with people. But I can assure you that we're making as fast as we can and getting as much out there for people so that they can get out in the field. Especially, talking turkeys today. We've shipped a lot of turkey rounds this year, so it should be easier to find than it has been in the last couple.
Yeah, I noticed just browsing around a little bit. It seems to be, there's a lot more in stock than out of stock compared to years past.
Yeah, we made it we started really early. Like a lot of people assume that when we're loading shells that, we'll start and we'll load turkey shells for 1 month, like in January. But really, to get ahead of it, we actually started about mid-October this year. And sometimes we'll even do some smaller runs in the summer just to try to get ahead of it. But yeah, we're doing our best.
Good deal. Good to hear that. So like all of our episodes, we're going to start with a question and answers from our social email past episodes. If you want to submit your own questions to the podcast, email us at ctd@phelpsgamecalls.com. So I picked a couple easy questions here, kind of with the theme of the podcast today. What gun, choke, and ammo combination are you using this year for turkey? So I'll say in years past, I've used a Mossberg 835 with a Compton choke 690, and I've used Federal 3.5-inch copper plated number 5s. It's just always throwing great patterns. I've got really good success with that. My pattern is pretty consistent. With that said, this year I'm going to switch to the Weatherby Element with an Indian Creek choke and Federal TSS number 9s, and I'm going to be able to back down to just a 3-inch shell and not take necessarily the beating from the 3.5s I have in the past. So that's my setup. What are you going to use this year, Daniel?
I got a Super Black Eagle 2, which is kind of my go-to shotgun. And then this year I have, 2 years ago, we launched 3-inch 2-ounce 7 and 9 TSS combo load. So it's about half 7s and half 9s. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. You get your shot pellet count up with all the 9s. The 7s can help you with a little bit of range. And so I'm going to try that. I get married to some loads that I really, really like, but in my job working on new products, and I always try out what we're doing. And so I'll experiment quite a bit. And, if I can kill a turkey with every load we have, that's kind of my goal. If I can get my hands on one, Benelli has launched a 28 gauge this year in the Super Black Eagle 3. And if I can do that, I'll have some of our, we load some, we have what's called a custom shop where we hand load TSS for people. And I'll try to hunt a turkey with a 28 gauge just to kind of check that box and say I did it. But if I don't get one in time, I got the 12 gauge at the ready.
Gotcha. Nice. The next question is, what is the ideal pattern? I can remember when I was new to turkey hunting, way back in high school, didn't know a whole lot about it. Out here in Western Washington, it wasn't a thing. And everybody had turkey targets, right? And then you would see you need to put 4 or 5 of them in the neck or in the head, a combination of. And we went down that rabbit hole, and then you start to look at, well, what's your pattern doing if you were left or right? Like, is it a consistent pattern? And so I've kind of, migrated to the 10-inch circle and 20-inch circle. How many pellets am I getting in there? And then I'm checking to make sure I don't have like big holes in that pattern. Is there a chance I would miss the neck or the head? I just want a very consistent pattern at 10 and 20. And really why I check my pattern at 20 with a 12 gauge is to just make sure how tight it is. Like how good do I have to be, at 20, but then at 40 yards, like what's my lethality? Like how many rounds or how many pellets or BBs am I getting inside of a 10-inch circle and a 20-inch circle? And there are some standard rules of thumb, 100 inside the 10, at 40 is a good enough load. Some people are 200 inside of a 20. But I just kind of look at that, make sure it's consistent. Nowadays with TSS number, 9s, or as you said, 7x9s, like the ability to get that BB count up is almost, I don't want to say too easy, but it's become a lot easier than it did back in the copper plated lead days.
Yeah, I always went with, and kind of what we look for when we're developing products is kind of 15 hits in the head and neck, no matter what range you're at. So whether that's lead or copper, lead, if you're doing 15 and you can't kill a bird with, you can do under, but that's giving you a lot of insurance, right? And I do like what you said about the 40-inch circle, because we've always said like edge to edge pattern. And what that means is, we want even coverage and those no holes. And so sometimes we do so I patterned it and I'm getting holes, and they get like, so what? So what do I do now? And that's where we'll recommend you start to kind of try that different choke tube, try a different shot size, because there could just be something with that relationship between that load and your choke tube that's just not giving you the evenness you're looking for. But we always shoot, like all of our standard testing is a 30-inch target at 40 yards. We'll shoot every load we have. And then at turkey, the requirement we had was depending on the load, we wanted like 50% of those targets within a 10-inch circle. So it's always going to be tight. I love what you said about shooting at 20 yards, because man, if you're choking tight, you're throwing a tennis ball at them, and it's hard to you hear a lot of guys talk about missing turkeys. It's not as hard as it sounds. So
Yep, exactly. And that was always my concern, especially hunting in Western Washington and stuff, is that bird's going to most likely be at 15 or 20. And as tough as these Easterns are to hunt in Western Washington, because there's just not very many of them, I didn't want it to come down to too tight of a pattern being the reason. So in that instance, we were just trying to get them to open up. Those are kind of the two questions we had today. Now I'm going to kind of jump in selfishly to like my own questions I have about everything, shotgun loads for turkeys. So the first thing is some of this new shot material. I know it's been around for a little bit, but shot material and shot size. I grew up everything was copper plated lead back then. Heavy shot started to pick up towards, the end of when I just I'm done developing my load. I'm just going to keep buying these 3.5 inch number 5 Federals. And some of these dang choke companies, like Compton choke, which I was shooting back then, they advised against shooting heavy shot. And so I just didn't even want to test that, issue out. But let's jump into shot material and shot size and what some of the new materials have allowed us to do to 56% denser, heavier, to basically allow a BB that's, a third of the diameter, or 2/3 the diameter to weigh the same, and how that's changing the way you're designing, turkey loads.
Yeah, getting into, tungsten, you kind of hit on it with heavy shots, 13 density. Metals is all ammunition is all it's mass and velocity together. So it all comes down to energy. So the denser you can make something, the more energy, the further it's going to carry its energy. And I've used this example a million times, but think of tennis balls and baseballs. They're roughly the same size, but there's just an awful lot more mass to that baseball. And if you're going to fire both those at 50 miles an hour or miles per hour, which one's going to hit the target harder? And it's the baseball, because there's just more mass to it. So that's what the tungsten is in the analogy. So it allows you to use, like you said, you can use a much smaller pellet. So if you think because it is 56% denser, think of a number 5 copper plated lead and a number 9 TSS tungsten super shot. Those two have the same amount of density. So if you push them out of the gun at 1,100 feet per second, they're going to hit the turkey just as hard as they do, even though that number 9 is so much smaller. And then the win to the equation is, in 1 ounce and 3/4, you have almost 3 times the pellets as you did in that copper number 5. And you probably went to a 3.5 inch because you could do a little heavier payload and get more pellets on target, right?
Yep.
So, now tungsten allows you to get just as many pellets as you did before, triple what you had before, the same amount of energy. And you can either come at them with a freight train of a 2 ounce load, or the trend is really going the other way, 20 gauge, 410 and sub gauges. And it really allows you to take a bird with a lot less recoil on the shoulder.
Yep. Pack a smaller gun around, less recoil. We'll get into it a little bit, about how it's made some of these smaller gauged, shotguns, a great turkey option now. With that said, is there anything that goes into the equation, Dan, of, air resistance and all that? I mean, it all adds up, but I think it has to do more with, weight, but you're shooting a little number 9 that doesn't have near as much wind resistance. I've heard, your comparison to number 5 copper plated versus number 9 is that when you do get out to 40, 50 yards, that number 9 might be flying at 200 feet per second faster by then, or, number 3, then plus once they hit the bird for penetration, you're able to drive that number 9 farther, one based on, the speed that it's able to potentially keep going, but then number 2, less resistance as it travels through, the bird's neck and head and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. The less the diameter you have, the easier it is going to penetrate. So you're going to get more. You're going to get into the vitals. As it flies through the air, kind of a rule of thumb is as shot gets smaller, it does disperse quicker. So think of as it scatters to the left and right of the pattern as it flies. So if we're going lead to lead, absolutely. It's a lot. You'll find no matter how much you choke, you got to choke really fine shot a lot tighter than you do bigger shot, number 5 or number 9 in lead. But they do kind of fly on par because of that increased density, because it's harder to pull it off track, even though it is a smaller pellet. So
gotcha.
I don't know if that answers your question, but you do see, and you really see it in steel. If you're shooting steel shot like a waterfowler, as your shot sizes go smaller, typically your pattern's going to start to widen out. And it's because those smaller pellets, they lose their energy quicker, but they're a lot easier to kick to the left or right,
Gotcha. One thing, that kind of piggybacks on that point is, there's always got to be cons, right? And we'll get into the main one, which is cost here in a little bit, but does safety become any bigger issue? I mean, ultimately we should always know our target, identify our backdrop, but with these extended ranges that we're getting out of, especially if you're down in those heavier loads of, 6 or number 5 TSS, is that been an issue or something we think about? Or like I said, as long as we're identifying targets, looking at backdrops and where that shot's ultimately going to land, it should be a non-issue.
It should be, because, your typical hunting rules apply, know what's behind your target and beyond. But it is, I mean, if you're using a bigger, we don't load anything bigger than a 7 in TSS. And kind of part of that reason, it's going to carry its energy a long way. So you really got to know what's behind you. And, think of, if I was going to shoot a turkey with number 6 lead at 40 yards, and there's another turkey about 200 yards away, in the field behind it, I probably don't got to worry about it. With the TSS, it very well could carry its energy enough to hit something behind it. So, other animals, you got to make sure your safety there. But for other hunters, so it is something to be aware of. We've seen it on. We have some tungsten in goose loads, and Heavy Shot has stories of this as well, where guys are in the field, they park the trucks 400 yards away, think it's plenty fine, and they'll find pepper holes from the hardness of the tungsten actually penetrating the windshield at 400 yards. No, that's a much higher trajectory, but you do got to be careful for sure.
Gotcha. With the the introduction of TSS and it catching a bunch of steam, you can't jump on a turkey hunting forum right now and not see everybody shooting a TSS load. Is bismuth and Heavy Shot and even copper plated lead are we going to start to see that phase out? Why has bismuth not caught on as much for sharing very similar densities to TSS as it cost? They both seem to be environmental friendly, but it seems like everybody's migrated towards TSS.
Yeah, it seems when we first launched the TSS, we were talking internally, and we'd always had a product called Heavyweight, which is 15 density tungsten, which was great, and people loved it. But our sales weren't as high as we kind of wanted, and we just assumed that market is what it is. And so my boss was like, "What do we got to do in turkey?" And I said, if we want to load the best turkey loads on the market, we'll load this TSS stuff. It's super expensive. We'll only sell, a little bit, but we will have the best turkey load on the market. And that first year we sold 4 times what we thought, and now we sell almost 4 times what we ever did in turkey loads. So it is a price barrier. It's a lot higher. But it seems that, I don't know, it had like this mythic kind of reputation before that, a couple smaller ammo companies were doing it, where normally you had a hand loader buddy who knew somebody who could load you up TSS. So it is a lot more costly. It seems like people have accepted it. In terms of bismuth, it's kind of tough to say, and I think it's still kind of a new thing where people are looking. I know it's one place in our lineup. We haven't had a bismuth offering yet. We're looking at doing that for turkey. I know I will say Heavy Shot a lot. They're a sister company of ours now, and I know that they offer it, and it does sell well, especially states like California where everything is required to be lead free. I think there's always going to be the market for the price point. And some people, get turned off by it. If turkey hunting was more like waterfowl hunting, where the volume, you're burning through shells left and right, there might be somewhat of a barrier. But most people, if you're shooting over 5 rounds of turkey a year, you're shooting a lot. So I think it's a little easier for people to bite off.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you kind of touched on it there a little bit. Is I would say maybe the only con I can find with TSS is either your choke not allowing it, a little bit of scarring of the barrel, but the number one, I think, would be the cost of the material. It's fairly expensive ammunition, but when you go to buy just, I believe it was a pound of number 9 shot, you're like in the $85 range, and it's expensive BBs. And so do you want to jump into that a little bit and then maybe roll that into, why maybe third degree is a great alternative where you're not filling your entire payload of shot with TSS, you're able to mix and get as you mentioned earlier, some of the reasons why number 7 and 5 and 6 lead may work. But can you touch on the cost of the TSS loads and then why third degree might be a good alternative for a turkey load?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to hit on something you said quick, though. You said about scoring the barrel. We really design our wads to be incredibly robust to prevent that. So just so people know, even like on something like a 410 or 20 gauge loads, we make specific wads to prevent that. So that's not as much of a risk. I can't speak for all the choke tube companies out there.
Yep.
And sometimes, and we'll get into chokes a little bit later. We'll talk about constricting tight, I guess. But if you're going to go really tight, some companies may recommend it, but some people do recommend it as well.
Yep.
But yeah, it's, like you said, $80 a pound. We buy our lead and steel off the kind of world market prices. 100% of the lead that we use at Federal comes from recycled car batteries. A lot of people don't necessarily know that. So we try to get a break on the price there, but they break the batteries down, they melt it down, they make it into the alloys we want. And world market price on lead or steel is like $1.20 or so a pound, $1 a pound. And we're buying tungsten anywhere between $40 and $60 a pound. So that's like significant cost increase. It's a lot harder to work with. Once it's formed, it's really hard to melt it back down and reuse it into something. So that adds some of the price,
Yep.
And we're always searching for, less of more inexpensive ways to obtain it. But so far, that just seems to be kind of where we are. So, and then so when you get into third degree, like a great part about a product like third degree, it's about a third TSS and 2/3 of lead. So it's a combo load for us. And what you're doing with that, it dovetails into what we were talking about with the really tight patterns too. When we came up with third degree, like in our brains, the best pattern would almost kind of like veer out to the left and right like a baseball diamond, and then turn into a rectangle and go straight forward. It would open up real quick and then fly and never disperse any further. Because if you got a really tight bird, and
Hopefully
you got decoys in tight, you can call them in close, because that's the funnest part about turkey hunting.
Yep.
And so we third degree were like, what if we can make the pattern open up quicker, but still give us effective lethality at 40 yards? So we put in number 7 tungsten at the 15 density tungsten at the time. Now it's TSS. We have number 7 TSS. We have number 5 copper plated lead, which people have been hunting with forever as the core of the pattern. And then we have number 6 flight stopper lead, it's called, which has this little ring around it, and that stuff scatters a little faster. So your pattern is about 20 to 30% bigger at 10 to 15 yards, and then after that, it just kind of rounds out into this nice even turkey pattern, to get you out to 40.
And those ones, the third degree seems to run at about half of the TSS, even less than that, $30.99 compared to like say, your $69.99 for the same size.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot more of a lot more affordable version to bite off, and so you're getting tungsten performance with it. So it does pretty well for us. It was if you're there's different kind of turkey hunters out there. Some people want as many pellets as possible in that 10-inch circle. Some people want like you were talking, a nice even pattern. If you're an even, we've always said we didn't make third degree to win pattern pellet count contests. We built it to kill turkeys, and it's proved itself to do that.
I'm going to throw a little curveball at you since it wasn't on my list of questions here. But when we talk about lethality and range, where these shots are, going to be lethal, what's your standard? And then if you can maybe give me an example of like, what's a number 9 TSS good for? Like, can you kill out to 60 yards, or, compared to like, number 5 lead, is good out to 50 yards max. We used to always go on max. It's like, well, if you shoot number 6s, don't shoot past 35. And if you shoot number 5s, don't shoot past 40. And if you shoot number 4s, you can kill a bird, and so we used to just go by the old, rules of thumb. But what does that new range do, as far as TSS? I know you guys only have number 7 as your biggest, 9 is your smallest, but what would you say like the average ranges are for those?
Yeah, any lead load, we'll stick to that 40. If it's a 20 gauge and a little lighter, maybe a little in it, and then pattern your gun and see what your pattern's doing. You're going to carry, at the velocities we're going, you're going to have more than enough energy to kill a turkey out to 40. And we've always heard stories of people who go beyond that. With TSS, I will easily say 50. 50 is easy, and I know you can go beyond that. And I've heard stories of outrageous, outlandish type of ranges that people have shot turkeys at. As a company stance, and personally, I'll probably always stick to that 50, and then anything else is up kind of the hunter to decide beyond that. We still want to promote, ethical hunting, and, just as you start to get further out, things can start to just, variables change, everything can start to expand. I know if you were to pattern your gun, you're going to see, lead number 5, like let's say you're shooting 1 3/4 number 9s out of a 12 gauge. Your pattern density is probably going to match a copper plated number 5 out to 70 yards, more than likely. And that pellet would have enough energy to kill a turkey that far. I would never tell anybody to go out and do that. Course. I know people do, but what it really does is like one of the first turkey I ever shot. I was out with a good friend of mine's dad, and he was one of my teachers and kind of a mentor, that he kind of taught me how to turkey hunt, which was great. But we were out, and we'd set up on them, and they hung out, or we got a gobble, and then we didn't hear anything. It never came back. And as soon as we stood up to walk, we looked out, and way out in this field was a tom working his way towards us. So we belly crawled to the edge of the field, and he's like, "How far is it?" I'm like, "God, it's far," And so it was like the last day of turkey season. So I popped up, and I'm thinking it's 50 yards, and boom, and I smoked him and just dropped him on the site. And that was with our old heavyweight 6s. And when we ranged it off, it was 65 yards that I killed the bird at. Now, if he would have said, you're 65 yards. I would have belly crawled 15 yards closer because I
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
wouldn't have the confidence to do it. So what it kind of allows you to do is that forgiveness factor. You know, we're excited or
Yeah,
we don't
yeah.
have good ranging, and so it's going to make up some of that your potential error for ranging stuff.
We've all seen plenty of gadgets and fads come and go, but here's one product that stood the test of time: Seafoam Motor Treatment. Lots of hunters and anglers know that seafoam helps engines run better and last longer. It's really simple. When you pour it in your gas tank, seafoam cleans harmful fuel deposits that cause engine problems. I'm talking common stuff like hard starts, rough engine performance, or lost fuel economy. Seafoam is an easy way to prevent or overcome these problems. Just pour a can in your gas tank and let it clean your fuel system. You probably know someone who has used a can of Seafoam to get their truck or boat going again. People everywhere rely on Seafoam to keep their trucks, boats, and small engines running the way that they should the entire season. Help your engine run better and last longer. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
One of the things that I'm most excited about with TSS and some of these new movements, and we touched on it a little bit, is that the 12 gauge is a little less required now. You know, back in the day, everybody was shooting, big 12 gauges, 3.5-inch magnums. And I feel that with, youth becoming more involved and maybe being a little bit nervous to shoot 12 gauges and, them wanting to shoot, youth 20 gauges or even 410s, I feel like that's been the biggest positive from this, aside from getting better patterns with our bigger 12 gauges, is that now these kids can go out and a 410 is a very good option for killing turkeys now, and 28 and 20 gauges are, perform very similar to the old 12 gauges. Have you guys noticed a big movement in the 410 market in the turkey ammunition world? As it picks up steam and allows these youth to shoot a gun they're a lot more comfortable with out in the turkey woods?
Yeah, it's been remarkable. And one of we knew it was theoretical possible. Looked at all the energy, and your 410 at our load is 13/16 ounce of number 9s. That is, if I remember right, 298 pellets, and an 1.75 ounce of number 5 lead is 268 pellets, give or take. So it's a little higher pellet count, but their speeds put them at the same energy. So you're basically shooting with your old 12 gauge load at a lot less recoil. So we put out the 410, and even some of because of the price barrier, even some of our retailers that were first like, you guys are selling turkey loads at 410, what are you doing? And it's going to cost this much, and it's been like the real shining star of the lineup. We sell almost as much 410 in one SKU as we do of the 4 or 5 12 gauge loads that we have in TSS. And I know that's some awesome. Of that's carrying over, we'll have stories of, kids shooting a 410, goose hunting, they're using the same load to, they're taking the kid duck hunting or adults, are using it. So we know there's some crossover into other stuff, But it's really like, it's kind of like this, I said check the box with 28 gauge. A lot of people are saying, I'm going to kill turkey with a 410. And, gun companies are coming up with a lot of single shots with red dots that are making, super light gun, making it really easy. Companies are coming out with 410 chokes. So it's really, created this kind of sub-market within it. And I'm like you, I don't own a 20 gauge right now that, fits me. I still had to use one from when I was a kid. But that's probably going to be my next purchase, is a 410 single shot that I'll use as a little turkey sniper.
Yeah. My buddy Randy Milligan, who we go and hunt with out there in Kansas, he's always giving me grief. He's like, "Don't shoot this 20 gauge because you'll never shoot your 12 gauge ever again." He's just
it's true.
Amazing patterns with some of that new, and that's like you said, it's a shining star. Like if this is able to get more youth out there with a more effective round, shooting a gun they're more comfortable with, it's only positives. From some of this new ammunition. So kudos there.
I was just at the NWTF show last week, and a majority, we were fortunate to get quite a few shells shipped in there, and a majority of what people were seeking out was 410 coming up just for that story. So yeah, it's been really cool.
That's awesome. I'm going to touch on wads a little bit and what the heck do those things matter? I always kind of joke is that they just seem to be a little piece of plastic that I step over to go check my target, or to, that pile up, on a waterfowl shoot that all end up at about the same range from you. Some of these new TSS loads are using flight control flex wads. Some of your older ammo and maybe some of your stuff still is using like the flight control, and the way that these things open up, they've got the mid-body slits and then they open from the rear with the pedals. And can you give us a little education? Because to be honest, like I've never paid that much attention to what those are actually doing. And they may be probably, the most important part of the whole, equation.
Yeah, it really is. Like, for people who don't understand what a wad is inside your shotgun shell, you got usually some kind of carrier mechanism that your shot is inside of. And that carrier mechanism helps carry it down the barrel. And then as it exits, separates from the shot, lets it fly through the air. Old shotgun shells would just have a felt wad. And if you didn't have any sort of choke system, it would disperse really quickly. Our kind of the minimum acceptable pattern, for a target load or a hunting load, the standard that we're looking for as an industry is like 70% of your pellets are within a 30-inch circle at 40 yards. So wad design can make a big effect on how many pellets fit in there and also the size of the pellet. So a typical wad goes open and it opens up like a flower petal. It just spreads out like you're opening up the fingers of your hand. You can't see me on camera, but and then that can fly through your pattern. It can allow just nice dispersion. It can disrupt the pattern potentially. It just depends on the wad system. So the flight control wad, and you mentioned the flight control flex wad. The flight control wad was designed so that the gun goes off, the wad comes out the barrel. It's a fixed tube on the front, and on the back it has these pedals. And as the muzzle pressure, that big muzzle blast goes boom, it flares the pedals out, and it acts like a parachute or an air brake, and it makes the wad kind of slow down and lets the shot go forward in this really uniform way. And so that's how you get nice, even patterns, and that's what the flight control wad is known for. When you hear flight control flex, which is in all of our loads now, when we first came out with, turkey loads in flight control, and then, Black Cloud was our steel load and Prairie Storm is lead. If you were using a ported choke tube, you're kind of directing some of that muzzle blast to the side before the ammo gets out the barrel. And so by reducing that muzzle pressure, it wouldn't open the fins up on the back of the wad. And if the fin don't open up, then the wad doesn't necessarily slow down, and it all just kind of flies with the shot in this really tight, erratic clump. So the flex wad was designed so that if you are using, there was a day where I would say, no, you can't use that Indian Creek on Federal. It's just not going to work. But now you can. We've made it so that you can use any ported choke tube on any one of our flight control products that says flex wad. Your main takeaway from this, you can shoot it through any choke tube, and it really helps you get tight and consistent edge to edge pattern.
Gotcha. So the analogy is like, some of the other wads out there are like hitting a tree going 68 to 0, very, very quickly. As soon as those pedals open up, the wad's going to break away, versus what you're saying with maybe like the flight control flex is, you're going to slowly just apply the brakes to slow down to zero. You're not going to just like smash in, and go 60 to zero. You're going to slowly back away. And in that way you can control that pattern a little more. You want it to be tight, but you don't want it to, like you said, if that shot stayed in the cup, you don't want it to be basically a slug, acting like a slug as it goes down range. So it's just a better way to control that process.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. When I was working, before I worked at Federal, I remember a guy told me he had turkey hunted with some of our copper plated lead. And when I worked retail, I came home, he goes, man, I hit the turkey. I flipped him over and he got up and ran away. And when he went over there, he picked up the wad and he was able to pour the shot out of it. And then he researched a little bit and he had a really heavy ported tube. And that was kind of my first lesson before I was even a company guy on what choke tubes to shoot with Federal or not. So part of my mission when I got on the Shot Cell products was working with the development team and say, how can we make this thing work through any choke tube no matter what? We just want to make it easy on any consumer. And then it just comes down to, choke tube combinations with the right gun you have and so on. Everything might be a little different. I'm
going to ask you just a personal question for myself. I got that Indian Creek, we're going to get into chokes here in just a second, but they have what their wad stripper or whatever. It basically a very, very minute constriction as it goes through that choke. Does that have any effect on your guys' wad, or is it designed to kind of work with that? Or have you guys did any testing with that specific, design idea?
We did a lot. I don't know the specific model that you have off the top of my head, but the Indian Creek, I believe at 665 diameter was one of our core development chokes that we used when we went through, because they had a pretty good name. A lot of people in the turkey market were familiar with them, and we tested a lot of others, but that was one that I wanted to make sure that we got through. So I think you're going to be just fine. Yeah. Perfect.
That's reassuring, since it's a brand new setup, so I haven't put it all together yet. But let's use that as our segue right into patterning, choke and constriction. The question, which kind of goes back to what we've already talked about: can too much choke be a bad thing? Everything you've always heard about turkey chokes, they're considered extra full or extra full. And then some of the new advice out there, especially with TSS, is like, well, maybe you just want to go full or, modified or whatever it may be. So what can you kind of tell us about, your understanding of chokes? How much is too much, TSS versus lead, and just kind of give us the rundown of what works best with Federal, turkey loads.
Sure. Like around that 665 seems to be pretty solid, but I know people go tighter, and there's a big relationship between, how are the forcing cones of this model of shotgun versus that shotgun, and that's going to affect the amount of pressure. Your pattern is greatly affected by the length of barrel on the gun, and then how much the forcing cone is redirecting the amount of pressure as the load comes down the barrel, and how long time that takes. So there's always a relationship there, but you'll find that your typical turkey choke constrictions, so like if your gun came with a turkey choke, I don't know what that diameter might be, it's a good place to start. It'll probably work pretty well through it. Now, if you want to get more specialized and try other things, I know that like the guys from True Lock have told us, you can choke number 9s really, really tight. I think there might even be down to like a 640, which is really, really tight. We're kind of talking industry jargon in a way. That's incredibly tight constriction. But 7s, they wouldn't go below 650 because they said if they did that, the pattern started to blow up. So you're like you're over compressing it. So it's kind of you do got to experiment a little bit, and it does make it tricky with something like TSS, because every time you experiment, it's costing you money as you go down.
Yep.
So what I'd recommend to people is reach out to the choke tube companies that you're thinking about. We may have not have shot all their loads, but they've more than likely shot ours. And they'll be happy to tell you, hey, I think, with your setup here, you're going to do this. I know like Rob Roberts out there, if you've got a Benelli or a Beretta gun, I mean, he really specializes in those. Reach out to Rob and he'll tell you, in your gun, you're probably going to use a T2, and he'll say that's going to give you the best pattern with Federal number 9s or whatever.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reputable chokes out there. You've got Carlson's, True Lock, Jeb's, Rhino, all of these specialty chokes that are out there. And one thing I had just, as you mentioned earlier, is just in my research, I didn't want to go too tight. I think I ended up with a 660 for that Invector, which, fit some of those Winchesters, the Mossbergs, it's kind of that universal choke that a lot of companies were using, and ended up there at 660. It looks like people were having, it's almost, if you're out there looking for like what choke to get and what constriction, I almost can guarantee you that if you type into, the Google, what load you're going to shoot, what choke you want to use, and what gun you have, that you're going to get some pretty good recommendations. Now, with that said, I also want to put the asterisk next to it that every gun and every load shoots different. I had a Mossberg 835 with the Compton choke. My buddy did, and they shot different shells differently. I polished my barrel with the old Scotch Brite trick, all the way through the choke. He didn't, and we were just getting different results. So there's a lot out there on choke constriction, and the patterns that people are getting that may save you a whole lot of money versus, just firing, a bunch of TSS down the barrel to figure it out. At least a good starting point. You're still going to have to proof it and make sure it works with your exact setup though.
Yeah, use it. Always start with a target load, especially if you're trying to get a red dot dialed in. Start with the cheapest load you can find, and that should get you close. And now then your velocity change and subtleties may come from there, but it's just, turkey hunting's gotten, like, loads are so advanced, optics are so advanced, guns are so much better. It's almost gotten to be like a rifle hunter. You have to, you got to dial your equipment in because we're giving you more lethality, but everything's getting a little tighter and tighter with the way technology is going. So you got to be a little more on.
Yep. I'm going to ask you a little side question as far as barrel cleaning. I shoot some custom rifles, and the builder said, once you shoot your first 5, check for copper fouling, shoot 5 or 10 more, check one last time. And then from then, you don't clean your gun anymore until something's happening. Just let that gun basically be fouled. As long as your shots don't move. What's your recommendation for cleaning shotguns? Is it similar? Does it not really matter at all when it comes to load performance and patterning?
From my experience, it doesn't, but there could be people out there who are more specialized than I am. I'm probably your average. If I'm on a hard duck hunt or a wet, rainy day, I usually tear my gun down every time I get home. If it's not wet and dirty, I've shot my Benelli most of trap season last year, I cleaned it once, I think. So I'm not as sore. So, but I do know if you're shooting a lot of lead, as a trap shooter, some of those pellets kind of bubble over the top of the wad. You will get lead fouling build up in the barrel. So you do want to clean it out. In terms of a turkey, gun and getting better patterns, doing like what you did with the Scotch Brite, I've heard of things like that. But yeah, you're getting a little beyond my expertise. And I know that, we have guns here that they've been test guns for years and years and years. And I don't think we do any special regimen to clean them. And they're probably getting shot more than most people's shotguns in the country.
I can imagine you guys pull the trigger a little more than most with those test guns. Some of that stuff, I was completely involved with turkey hunting, and it consumed my life a little bit. And so it was every little thing I could do like that. Let's polish the barrel today with a bunch of gun oil and an SOS pad, and it did improve. It did make a difference back then, but nowadays it seems like there's even a market for basically people quote unquote turkeyizing, or however you'd say that word. Mm-hmm. Basically making a gun a dedicated turkey killing gun. And I don't know what all goes in that, but I've seen a lot of people talk about having your gun sent off to get this or that done, or make this modification. So
yeah, I kind of mentioned Rob Roberts before, and that's he'll blow. They call it blow out the forcing cones, and it's kind of that back portion of the shotgun where the shell comes out of the chamber and where the shot first hits, and you can optimize that angle of the cone. And if you make it a little bigger, it's less of a harder recoil. When you first get hit, because you're not running into that. It's wider. I don't know what's the best. You're going into a wider hallway, right? So there's less resistance for your load to go down. It helps even it out as it goes down the barrel. So it's going to help even as it goes out the barrel. And that's about the extent that I know. I've been to Rob's shop and I've talked to him, and he kind of blew my mind when he was talking. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, you can go down the rabbit hole with trying to get the perfect load, but that's what's nice about what we've been talking about. It seems like TSS has kind of taken a lot of that extracurriculars and just put your mind at ease that this is going to be, a good enough pattern, and without doing all that extra work that we used to do back in the day on lead or copper plated lead. So, all right, so I want to jump into some state regulations, and we did a lot of talking about number 9s. I know back in 2020, there were 6 states back then that weren't allowing number 9s to be used, or sub-gauge shotguns such as the 28 or the 410. So do your own research. Make sure the state that you're hunting in, everything that your setup is legal.
Yeah, we've done an extensive effort. We got a good relationship with the game and fishes too, and they like to expand with technologies. And 9 was the big one. It's legal in most states. Like I said, I wish I knew that number right off the top of my head, but I don't. But you should be able to use it almost anywhere. And then same with the sub gauges. And a lot of it just came down to information. Like, hey, you're like everything I said. They could just listen to this podcast and they would they'd be filled in to show. So we just try to share that and say, hey, we're still killing turkeys ethically. Some states it's easier. Sometimes it's a full legislative regulation change or a wording change, statute change. And some it's just the Game and Fish Department signs off on it. So if there is somewhere, if you're gunning to shoot a turkey with a 410 and it's not legal, just politely reach out to your Congress people or your Game and Fish people and just say, hey, we're doing it everywhere else. Why aren't we doing it here? And just kind of let your voice be heard.
Gotcha. While we're talking about state regulations, is there still a pretty big push as far as like lead moving forward, especially whether it's copper plated or not? Can you give us any information kind of on that front and how long we can expect lead to be around in turkey loads, or kind of you probably have a more up to date understanding of where that movement's going?
Yeah, so since California changed, it's kind of assumed that it looks like Washington and Oregon will follow suit. We do follow that situation. We try to have a lead-free solution everywhere in our lineup. We do, and I do in almost every product category I have, with the exception of rifled slugs. And that's not a huge demand item for us. If California required a slug zone, which they don't, I'd probably have one, even though we're working on right now. So we're very cognizant of it. We work with the NSSF, the National Shooting Sports Federation, to stay up tabs with that and, be informed ourselves and be as informational as we can to the industry too. In terms of lead turkey shells, I think as long as there's a market for them, we'll have lead turkey in our lineup. And if legislation requires us to change, we'll be ready to support it.
Hopefully that answers a bunch of your questions through my questions I had. And I'm going to close this out, Dan, with if you could help a new turkey hunter with one tip, what would it be? Let's get your best turkey hunting tip.
Don't call too much. And that's really going to be, I guess I'll have 2 tips. It'd be like, find a good turkey hunter to take you hunting would be one. But if you don't have that option,
exactly.
Don't call too much. Especially I'm up in Minnesota. We hunt a lot of eastern birds. You gobble at them, and then you got to give them some time to calm down, and hopefully you'll hear them a little closer. And I've spooked more birds off because I've been too aggressive going for it. And I was finally able to go hunt Rio turkeys, which you can gobble your head off, and it's fantastic. Yep. It's way gratifying when you're going after them. But I would just be very cognizant of how much calling you're doing. And, the birds will let you know when you should be done, and you're probably going to have to learn that lesson on your next hunt because you already blew it. So.
Yep. Yeah, it's the same thing we've talked about a lot is, hunting Easterns compared to your Merriams and Rios are just a different, you put your running shoes on for Rios, Merriams, and you can call a lot more versus Easterns. You better be patient, sit still, and don't call near as much.
Oh, it's so hard.
For sure. So, yeah, well, I really appreciate having you on today, Daniel, and hopefully you've have a good spring, or you've already had a good spring since we're probably right in the middle of turkey season. And thank you for your knowledge on everything turkey shotgun shells.
All right, I appreciate it. Anytime.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. Simply pour a can in your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. Pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
Hey guys, turkey season is in full swing right now, and if you are planning on getting after it, make sure to pick up some Meat Eater Phelps turkey calls to stuff into the old turkey vest or into your fanny pack right now. I carry a few different things. I like to use mouth calls. and I like to use pot calls. Mouth calls or diaphragms, I like them because it gives you hand-free calling, meaning when you're working a bird up close, you can have your gun on your knee, finger on the trigger, ready to roll, and still be making turkey sounds. I like pot calls because I just like pot calls. I enjoy calling with a pot call. Whatever direction you go, including a box call, which I don't personally use too much, but they're fun and great, and I started out with them. Yanni, on the other hand, one of my main turkey hunting buddies, he loves box calls. And what's funny is I'll now and then look to him and give him the look that means get out your box call and find us a turkey. So it's not that I don't like him. I just have Yanni use his. Then I don't have to carry it. Go to Phelps Game Calls. Get calls that are made in the USA and get calls that'll get them close. Find yours at phelpsgamecalls.com today.